Welcome to this episode of the Biometrics Leadership Lab podcast. I'm Amanda Cross, and my guest today is Marla Husnik. Marla has been in leadership roles as a biostatistician working in clinical research for 15 years. Most recently, she was senior director at Teva Pharmaceuticals, where she built and led a group of in-house and FSP statisticians, all working in neuroscience on phase 1 through 3 trials focused on schizophrenia, tardive dyskinesia, migraine, multiple systems atrophy, and pain. Prior to Teva, she worked in early phase oncology at Janssen, Johnson & Johnson. And prior to that, she spent the majority of her career at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center, also known as Fred Hutch. There, she worked within the Statistical Center for HIV/AIDS Research and Prevention, a unique statistical organization funded through grants from NIH, pharmaceutical companies, and the Gates Foundation. There, she built and led a team of statisticians and programmers working on phase 1 through 4 studies for the development of microbicides for HIV prevention, focusing on the most vulnerable populations around the world. One accomplishment she holds dear from her time at Fred Hutch is her leadership of the statistical team responsible for the ring, a novel vaginal ring containing a non-nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitor called dapivirine, to licensure by the EMA for African countries. Marla holds a master's degree in biostatistics from the University of Minnesota and a PhD in epidemiology from the University of Washington. And today we are talking about her leadership journey and what she's learned along the way. So Marla, thanks so much for taking some time today.
Yes, of course. Thank you for having me.
The question I like to start asking everyone is, how did you get involved in clinical research anyway?
It's a great question. I think it goes all the way back to my undergraduate days. I went to St. Olaf College and I was a mathematics and philosophy double major there, actually. And honestly, I was preparing myself to go to law school, if you can believe that. And what I did is I did an internship for 2 summers at the city attorney's office, and I learned a great deal and I really enjoyed it. But what I learned about myself in that experience was that I probably wasn't capable of arguing a case where I didn't actually believe the truth, that the truth of my clients, say. And, I had conversations with the attorneys there, and they said, yeah, you would have to do this, if you became an attorney, probably. I worked for the city attorney's office, so they were bringing cases against a variety of individuals. But I thought deeply about that, and I decided, I think because I love mathematics so much, I think I really want to focus on doing something in that arena. So while I was studying mathematics, I took a statistics course, an undergraduate statistics course. And ironically, it was my least favorite course in my entire mathematics program there. But I was fortunate enough to make a friend in the class, and she and I were talking about what we were going to do after graduation. And she said, well, my advisor told me about this field of biostatistics. Now, mind you, this was way back in the early 90s. So, biostatistics was actually a fairly little known field at that time. And so I thought that sounded really fascinating. And I also thought it might be a great way for me to really kind of grab the bull by the horns with statistics, because I felt like statistics was just such a odd field. I mean, it was just so different than the other math that I was studying. So I went ahead and did research, and I found several schools that I was interested in, and then I applied, and I ended up going into biostatistics and got my master's degree. And there, of course, we're trained to do clinical trials as a biostatistician. So that was really my segue into clinical statistics.
That's funny. I ended up studying statistics because I was originally an economics major. And by the time I took my first econ class, I thought it was the most horrible thing I had ever sat through in my life. And I was like, what do I do now? And then I found this, I was like, oh yeah, that stats class I had was super easy. So let me just major in that. One of the things I find most interesting in your background, because I don't often talk to people with this background, is you've got a pretty large experience in academia from Fred Hutch and large pharma. So curious what you think is the biggest difference from working in academia to working at a large pharma company.
Yeah, I mean, I feel very blessed and grateful for the fact that I've been able to work across different industries within this career. And I would say the biggest difference, and one thing I'd clarify about the Fred Hutch is that it's not purely academic where, you might be working with an investigator who has a small grant or what have you. It was a very unique situation because I would consider us there at the Statistical Center for HIV/AIDS Research and Prevention as kind of an academic CRO because we had so much going on. But we also had the academic arm, like you're saying. And so I would say that the driver there was all about scientific inquiry. This idea that we really wanted to do very, very good science, and that may hopefully lead us to a licensure of a product. It wasn't driven so much by regulatory compliance even, or just driving the regulatory kind of prerogative. And so with that, much of what we did was conduct clinical trials and move the products along like we did with the ring, of course, but we had many other partners that we were working with within that environment, along with asking a lot of scientific questions of the data sets, of the clinical trials data sets. And so we published many manuscripts and produced abstracts for conferences. And that was a big focus of the work there. Whereas my experience in industry has been, all about moving products through the pipeline for regulatory approval. So the focus is much more in that arena rather than kind of that scientific inquiry sort of aspect to it. Although there is some of that, of course. And I definitely experienced that when I worked at Janssen. There's a group there doing a lot of methods work and, really driving the statistical methodologies behind the clinical trials. And also at Teva, we had a small group working on methods and such. But I would say that it wasn't as much at the forefront as my experiences, say, working at the Fred Hutch.
And what a nice experience it is for you to kind of just investigate the data for the scientific questions and see what you can discover. I've done so much work on the CRO side, and it is just heads down and churn through that clinical trial. But a lot of statisticians on CRO side are always very excited to work on, protocol development or, kind of more investigative work at the translational stage, because it's not something you get to do a lot of at a CRO. You're very far removed from it. I think you're closer to it at a pharma company where you are, responsible for that compound. You moved into your first managerial role at Fred Hutch. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I did manage a group while I worked at the Minnesota Department of Health as well. So I did have managerial responsibilities there. And I worked in public health for 3 or 4 years before I went over to the Fred Hutch. But
so you go from being an individual contributor to being a manager. Yeah. What surprises you the most, in making that move?
Well, I don't know if it was necessarily surprising, but I would say the whole concept of really being the hands-on contributor where you're doing the work yourself and solving those problems yourself. I mean, that's mostly kind of the driving force as an individual contributor. Whether you're doing, say, SAS programming or R programming or what have you, there's always some problem to solve or some kind of issue that might need to be navigated either in writing or through your analysis work or what have you. So I would look at that as, a lot of problem solving, which I very much enjoyed. I liked that. And I think most all of us who work in this field tend to be very detail-oriented individuals. I would say that I am a very detail-oriented individual, and that I would say, okay, therein lies the surprising part, which is to be an effective leader and manager, you have to be able to separate yourself from all of the minute details of the work. You know, you have to kind of sit back and decide. And I actually went through this, decide that, okay, it's time for me to sort of let go of actually doing the hands-on problem solving work. And instead, I'm going to now really focus on the individuals on my team, each individual, and then the team as a whole. So that was a big part of making that transition. And actually, I really didn't want to take a full-on managerial role until I felt like I inside had accomplished what I wanted to accomplish as an individual contributor. And I remember asking myself that question, actually. And, you know, at that time I decided, okay, I think I can do this.
And it's a good question to ask, because this comes up in a lot of conversations I have with different leaders as they've moved through the ranks, that first shift from individual contributor to manager is probably one of the bigger shifts, because you're responsible for more than just yourself at that point, but also you have to be willing to not do the work yourself. And so an important question to ask is, what really gives me joy in my day, and what do I really want to do, and what will it look like for me working if I'm not writing that SAP, or I'm not checking those tables, or I'm not doing the work? What does it look like to help others who are doing the work, and will I be satisfied with that? And that's a question that everybody has to ask themselves, I think, as they go through their careers.
And I think really understanding what drives you, what makes you feel like you are sort of meeting your goals and accomplishing things. Because if you're a very kind of specific project-oriented, goal-oriented person where you feel really satisfied about setting a goal, even for your day or for your week or month or year, like these are the things I'm going to do and accomplish. Becoming a supervisor and manager, you really do have to think differently about your goals and your accomplishments. You know, you have to kind of adapt to that and start thinking a lot more about others' goals and accomplishments, and being able to be there to support them, to honor them, and to really lift them up and be able to help them move in that direction way more so than being an individual contributor.
But it's how you're helping others achieve their goals and reach their accomplishments. It can look very, very different. It can feel very different.
And all the while keeping your eye on the prize of what actually the goals of the organization are. I mean, so there's the individual goals for career development on the individual level within, say, people that I supervise and manage. But there's also the corporate goals or the organization's goals. And that's what I have to keep in my mind, which is sort of guiding and directing and mentoring individuals so that we can focus on those greater goals as well, all along meeting their goals, their individual career goals. And that's a challenge. That can be challenging. So, you know, if you can accomplish that, I think you can become a great leader.
It's a fine line to walk as a manager and higher as you're moving up through the leadership ranks, because if you think about what an employee or an individual contributor thinks is a good, effective line manager, they're getting a lot of support, they're getting a lot of protection from outside, problems rising. They're having a well-balanced workload. They're being set up to do their job effectively, which is 100% true and accurate. If you think about from the company's perspective, what's making a good manager, it looks very different. Is everybody being fully utilized? Are we doing things efficiently? Are we only working on things that are furthering the company's goals and profits? And so it can look and feel a lot different. And a good manager, and as you grow and become more of a leader, is you're balancing those two things.
Yes.
It's like almost like walking a tightrope, because you want to do what's right for your team, and you have to do what's right for the company.
And the other thing I was going to mention is, as that was a bit surprising to me and I had to learn, is you're not only managing and developing your group, right, as the leader of that group or manager, the go-to person, but you're also managing up, which is that leadership above you, that those individuals and their goals for you as a group also need to be effectively managed. And that takes a lot of communication on both sides.
So taking a little bit of a shift, because you've done so much work in developing high performing teams, which is why I wanted to talk to you. So when you look, well, I think because at Fred Hutch, you had something to do that a lot of us don't actually get a chance to do in industry, which is build teams of statisticians and statistical programmers working together on specific projects, right? If you're on CRO side, you're kind of like, you get a statistician assigned, you get a programmer assigned, they may be doing a bunch of other things. You don't really, I mean, you have a team, but it's different because they haven't all been hired to further this project or the scientific inquiry. So really curious about, as you've built teams of statisticians and programmers, particularly at Fred Hutch, like, what do you look for when you're rounding out a team?
Yeah. I mean, back in the day when I was working on developing that team, I had very specific criteria for what I was looking for at the time. And I handpicked individuals, both internally and then, of course, externally from applicants. And I have to say, I was very, very picky about who I brought onto the team, because I know that at the end of the day, I mean, I had other experiences with individuals that were very difficult to work with. And, I had learned along the way, right, about what works, what doesn't. And so by that point, I just kind of knew that I needed individuals with certain communication skills, number one, teamwork skills, and of course, being excellent with their craft, whatever it might have been, statistical programming or as a statistician. So I had positions where I was looking for senior level individuals like statistical programmers, and there were a couple internally that actually went to, and I asked if they would join my team, and that worked out very well. And then I had others who came to me externally, and like I said, reviewing CVs and just interviewing and what have you. I had, I was just very particular about how the individual communicated and whether I felt they could fit in well with the team. And matter of fact, always I had my teammates, I'll just, within my group, interview them as well. So I had a bit of a democratic process there in terms of bringing new people onto the team, because I knew that whenever you bring a new person on, whether I like them or not, they also have to be able to cooperate and work well with others on the team, obviously. And that's actually the most important part. So we had a bit of a democratic process there.
So a couple of points I'm just going to highlight, because I think you mentioned something. You mentioned the things that you looked for, and I just want to note that the technical acumen was actually the third item on your list. So it was the ability to work in a team. It was the ability to communicate well, and, by the way, have the technical acumen. But as you're crossing different functions and you're working in a broader team, that ability to communicate and blend well really, really matters. And the second part you mentioned is having the peer interview. And I'm a big proponent of peer level interviews, not just hiring manager or manager level people interviewing candidates, but there's something to be gained on both sides from having a peer-to-peer interview. People are going to be working together, and they should know what it's like, how they will mesh together. And also you hear a unique take on the job from talking to someone who's doing that job every day that sounds a little different if it's just coming from a manager or the team leader.
I am a huge proponent and advocate for just allowing buy-in from individuals on my team for change. So change management is huge. And when you're bringing a new person onto a team, that's change, right? You're managing that change. And so you have to allow individuals to kind of adjust to that and also buy into it. So that's where that, like you're saying, peer interviewing or that democratic process to just kind of come together and say, look, it's not that I wouldn't bring forth the candidate and even select the candidate at the end of the day, but I'm a huge proponent of that kind of team think process that is very, very important, because if you allow for that, then you've kind of jumped over a lot of hurdles right from the get-go. I had the experience where I was excluded from that process, and then I was forced to work with individuals that sometimes were not that easy for me to work with. And I had wished that my managers had allowed me to kind of be a part of that process. So you do learn yourself along the way about what works and what doesn't.
I think everybody has had the experience of finding out you have a new teammate that you had no idea was coming, or that you ended up not meshing well, and you would give anything for a chance to have interviewed them and at least noted your feedback, whether or not it was eventually taken. And that the other point is, this is a thread that I've had in other conversations too, which is you just said you learned from not having had that chance, what you would have preferred. And I often tell people, if you don't know what kind of manager you want to be or what kind of leader you want to be, you can start with what you don't want to be.
I had many really excellent mentors and managers as well. So obviously you want to pick up on, when you're young in your career, you want to pick up on what they're doing really, really well. And I had a wonderful manager when I worked at the health. I had two really excellent managers actually when I worked at the health department. And I wanted to emulate a lot of what they did as well. So, which is really excellent communication and building a lot of trust.
Those are good traits for any manager to have, is communication and some feeling of trust. I think, you're not always going to get everything your way as an individual contributor or as a manager or somebody at any level of an organization, but having the opportunity and the space to have the conversation and work through it brings a better feeling of collaboration and trust all around. What do you think are some of the early signs that a team is struggling?
A telltale is when people leave, obviously, that they've kind of hit their limit at that point and then they leave. So that's a definite telltale that the team is not functioning well. But also just internal conflict. When you start seeing people come to you with some kind of internal conflict, it could just be even kind of small. Now, if it's a collaborative thing where they come into your office and say, look, we're struggling with this problem, or, we'd like to get your insight. Okay, that's very different than when one person comes and starts complaining about another person or says, they did this and, I don't understand why they did that and this kind of thing. Then that needs to be dealt with, I would say, right away. I am a proponent of just nipping everything at the bud when there's conflict internal within individuals on a team, because no matter what, that is going to affect the broader team. So it could just be two individuals. And I've experienced this several times in my career where it was just two individuals that for whatever reason, they just were not clicking well. And usually it has something to do with one or the other is a little more competitive, or they want to kind of one up the other or show to the boss that they're doing better somehow, or things like this. I think the underlying thing is competition, really. And it's in all of us. It's human nature, right? We're competitive by nature. Human beings are. So there will always be some element to that. But I do think you can quelch it as a leader and as the person who's kind of the hub and the wheel. And that is by reassuring individuals that they will be treated fairly and equitably. I believe in equity, which means not everyone is treated the same, but they're treated in a way that is equitable. So then you have to troubleshoot and figure that out.
Worry about yourself and what can you do to influence the situation, and how can you navigate through the situation, and what can you take responsibility for. I think what becomes more concerning for me is when I start to hear the same name coming from multiple people, or the same complaint coming from multiple people, and then that tends to be a clear sign that there's something going wrong, and how people are collaborating and working together has to be addressed in some way. And I do think even with, if you're hearing the same name from multiple people, even with that same name person, just try to figure out what's going on with them and where are they struggling and what's making it. Sometimes it's not a good fit. Sometimes it's a readjustment. And sometimes people just need to understand that you won't get along with everybody in life, unfortunately. Right? I mean, sometimes
Yes.
You'll have great coworkers. Sometimes you'll have a mix. Sometimes you'll just, go find another job. But, I think that it's not always going to be 100% smooth sailing. The ability of a team to recognize that there is a problem and then make an adjustment is what actually makes the team strong, not just that everybody gets along.
And you have to focus on the goal. What is the work that we are doing, rather than specific personalities? So I like what you said, though, about if also others are one individual, say, or two individuals that aren't getting along or something like that. Yeah. I mean, I would say that it's like anything. It's like any relationship in life. It's always better to bring it to the fore, communicate as effectively as you can from the get-go. But, in a business environment, there are other things that may need to be done. Like I've put people on personal improvement plans. If really there are issues with one individual or more individuals, they may have to eventually go on a personal improvement plan where, they're working closely with you to kind of, improve things, and you're monitoring that over time.
Is, as a manager, one of your responsibilities to your team and to the business is to address performance and keep everything running smoothly. And it can be really detrimental to the rest of the team to see poor performance or poor attitude or poor communication go unaddressed, because the feeling of, well, then why bother can really overtake a team and be fairly demoralizing. So it's uncomfortable 100%, and sometimes needs to be addressed.
And you're setting an example, right, to the other individuals in the group. As the leader of the group, you have to set that example that this, whatever the behavior is, will not be tolerated, really. And set the tone. And my philosophy has always been, look, let's focus on the goal. We're here to work and achieve the goal of the company. And but we can have a good time. We can stay positive. And this is our life. This is my life and all of your lives. And so don't we want to come to work and have it be good, have it be positive? So that's the tone that I've always liked to set. And when there's issues, then we deal with those issues, and then we go back to the positive tone.
Yeah. So, I have someone who said to me, we're all adults, and all these people that are frustrating you at work are fully competent, functioning adults outside of work as well. For the most part. And so, they're not suddenly, ineffective because they've come to work. But what is it about what's going on at work that is making it a struggle, and how can we address that issue, focus on the goal, and then move on from that? And that's really stuck with me, because you're like, how can somebody be so stupid? Well, they're not actually stupid. They're just, maybe they're not in the right role. Maybe they don't know an important piece of the puzzle. Maybe, they felt that somebody didn't tell them something they needed to know at some point. And so it can really escalate and take down a team. So you have to be willing to have some of those difficult conversations or just uncomfortable conversations around what's going on and what's missing for you and how can we move that forward.
Just one last point is, we're all humans and we all have emotion, right? That we're dealing with just throughout our day and just in life in general. So just acknowledging that and recognizing that someone might be having a bad day, or someone might just be, like you're saying, feeling left out or having some emotions around that. That to me is totally normal. And just, if they just need an ear, I've lent my ear many, many times just to hear people out. And, whatever, there may be things going on in their life, obviously. When you work in it, I worked at the Fred Hutch for over 20 years. That was like the majority of my adult life I spent there. And and I worked with many other people there who also were there that long. And so, we all have life we're living and many trials and tribulations of our own lives, right? And you can't help but bring that to work sometimes, just because we're human beings. So I think just being empathetic and compassionate around that as well is really, really important.
20 years. I mean, you've lived a long part of your life with these coworkers. So, you've probably seen the good, the bad, and I guess the ugly is the term, but I don't want to say it. When you've got a team, maybe they don't all sit in the same place or they don't have the same job function. How do you build a shared sense of purpose within that team?
Yeah, I would say I had that when I worked at Teva, because I had colleagues in Israel, and then I had colleagues, in various places in the US as well. And I think the important thing is to build trust internally. So developing individual relationships with each of the team members so they feel that they can trust me as the leader of the group, number one. That's critical from the get-go. And then as you build that then kind of emanates into the group, right? Because if they feel that they can trust me, then they start feeling comfortable to be able to interact amongst themselves. And I actually feel like that really happened, even though we were all over the globe and it didn't really matter. I brought them together. I created individual, regular check-ins. So every week or 2 weeks or whatever I needed to do with each individual, depending upon what they needed and what levels they were at. And then for the team, making sure we came together on a regular basis and we had team meetings and eliciting a lot of input from people within the team setting. So, I would have I'd ask individuals if they'd be willing to present what they were working on, even for 10 or 15 minutes or something like that. And usually the more senior individuals in the group, so that the juniors didn't feel intimidated by that, right? But they were learning something. So I think that was very helpful in just making everyone feel like we were on the same team. And even though one person might be over here working on this problem or this clinical trial or this in this particular therapeutic area or, indication, that they were still connected to them. And they may have been doing some kind of work that might cross over with what they were working on, in which case they could lean on their colleague to be like, hey, how did you do that? Or what have you. So I think that cross-pollination and sharing of information and learning from each other is really critical.
Don't overlook a regular one-on-one with your direct reports. Some people want to talk for an hour and go over everything that they're doing, and other people just, will be fine for 10 minutes. But the power of that connection and the time together to work through issues is very important. And I really like what you said about the team. It can be the team meetings. It can be very easy if you have a large number of direct reports who are all working on something different, which is very common on CRO side. And it's very easy in a remote first world for them to just kind of feel out on their own, right? And there's not a lot of connection there. Hopefully they're connected to their line manager because you're having those regular one-to-ones, but having some sort of regular team meeting or department meeting kind of gives everybody a shared sense of purpose and a shared sense of connection. And there's a lot of problems that are consistent from project to project, even if they're not exactly the same, because the indication is different or the sponsor is different or the study design is different. There's a lot of data issues that will crop up, or how you handle things, or how you're handling, oh, my ClinOps team is, late getting queries resolved. There's just a lot of information sharing that can go on that can make people feel they're not alone and feel supported and give a much more team oriented approach to the job.
And you can help them make those connections in those meetings or through email or what have you. In your one-to-ones, you can say, look, I just spoke with so-and-so and I know they're working on this. So let me connect the two of you so that you can, learn from each other and work together. I think just, again, being the hub and a wheel and allowing for that opportunity to arise with the individuals on the team is really critical to building that team atmosphere and the camaraderie that is needed to have a really high functioning team.
We kind of just touched on this a little bit, but how do you adapt when you're working across cultures and time zones? We're not all going to the office and staring at the same people every day anymore. So what strategies do you use to adapt in your own styles?
Well, we all had to learn to work on the screen like this and actually see yourself. I mean, before COVID and Zoom and all of this technology that we have, we weren't always looking at ourselves as we communicate and speak. So I just bring that up because I think it's really important, because some people do not feel comfortable with that, to be on a screen like this, seeing themselves. So, but I do always advocate for turning on your screen. I understand that people need to turn off their screens, but turning on the screen is really critical, because it's not just, it's not 3D communication like in person, but it's the next best thing, right? Because we have body language that we see, right? Just even, I'm looking at myself right now speaking. That is very important, to be able to see each other and see how, we're moving and the tone of our voice and what we're saying, because I think that emanates a lot of information about being a human being and how much commonality we have, even though maybe we live in a different side of the world and we have different culture or what have you. So that's the first thing. Just being able to see each other on screen, I think, is really critical. The other thing is embracing differences. So one of the things I've done, say with my group at Teva, is around the holidays. So I had people that were British, because they came from the CRO that we worked with, and they had their holiday traditions. And then I had people in Israel, and then I had people in the US. And, people celebrate the holidays differently. Not everybody celebrates Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever. So what we did is we brought that to the team, and we just had a very nice interaction about tradition and shared that with one another. And I thought that went a really long way in building a lot of camaraderie and a lot of togetherness, because it was just so much fun to hear about how people celebrate the holidays, what they do, what their traditions are, whether it be with their families or friends or colleagues or what have you. And so I think that helps bridge, gaps in terms of whether it be physical gaps or religious gaps or what have you.
Count me on the team that does not like watching themselves on camera. So this is always very hard for me. But I remember, and I've learned, I know on almost every platform how to turn off myself so I don't have to see myself. I saw this, I read this article. It must have been, mid-COVID or something, that was like, why is it so draining being in a Zoom meeting all day when you could see people all day and not be that draining. And one of them was like, because you're looking at yourself, and imagine you had somebody walking around you all day holding up a mirror so you could see yourself. You're not used to it, and it can be very disconcerting. So you can be on camera and turn yourself off on almost every platform out there, which is very helpful. But I think that the icebreaker type stuff, or the team building type stuff that you're talking about, some people are like, I'm just at work. Let me get my work done. But it goes a long way to just kind of humanizing the team and making connections and feeling like you all are people, not just automatrons programming or, writing, whatever you're doing all day. I do that a lot with my teams, especially my international teams, like where you are, like even like, what'd you make for dinner last night? Because it's something I've never heard of before, but they eat all the time. And I'm like, okay, well, I wonder, I don't even have that cooking pot. I don't know how to do that. So it's a way to create that camaraderie that used to exist organically when you had a lot more in-person time.
You can meet for coffee even and just have a chat, right? About recipes or what have you. I did a lot of that. And honestly, I think that goes so far in terms of being able to build that team cohesiveness, and which then equates to high functionality in terms of getting work done together. Investing in those kinds of things, I think, really go a long way at the end of the day for the company in terms of building a really cohesive, high functioning team.
And I can hear, coming from Sierra side, I can hear people say, but who has time for that? Who has time for that? And I always think if you have a standing coffee drop in on the calendar, 30 minutes once a week, just, it gives people a time to just show up, build a connection, take their mind off of work, which actually can have the end result of making them more focused when they go back to work, right? There's nothing wrong with taking a break and connecting with your coworkers, and you might just clearing your mind and taking some space might solve a sticky problem that you have. But there, there's space to be very, very busy, and there's space to be connected with your coworkers, and you can have both.
Yes. And I think you need to have both, actually, because again, we're living our lives at work, right? We spend more time at work our entire lives throughout our profession than we do with our family. And at the end of the day, you have to, if you're going to stay in a job, you want to feel good about it. You want to feel like you're making friends, like you have connectedness with your colleagues to a certain degree. Yes, you have to produce the work first and foremost, but I do not believe that it is mutually exclusive to be a high performing, high functioning producer of work and not be able to make friends at work or have great relationships at work. I actually think they go hand in hand, because you get more energy when you feel really good about your environment at work to be able to really work hard and rise to the occasion. During those really tight timelines or something comes up or whatever, all of a sudden your team or individuals have to rise up, right? Are they going to want to rise up if they have negative feelings or kind of don't feel all that connected to their team? But if they feel really connected and they feel like, yeah, we can do this, then they're going to rise up to that and make that work, get that work done, even if they had to put in the, nights and weekends or whatever it is.
You're not going to make you probably are going to make some lifelong friends at work through jobs. Certainly I have. But there's certainly nothing to lose by connecting with some individuals at work. I'm a big collaborator. I always talk about knowing people in other departments, knowing who you're working with, knowing who you can reach out to, just understanding more about the work that you're doing so you can do your job better. And you cannot do that in isolation. So you do need to have some connections. So if anybody is a new manager who is listening to you, what advice would you give someone who was just starting out as a manager?
I think the most important thing is what we first talked about, which is to check in with yourself. and make sure you're ready to think more about the other than yourself in terms of what you're doing and accomplishing. Because I think to be really effective, you have to be in the mindset of being more of a giver than an achiever, you know? And I think, I mean, honestly, I've been in both camps. I'm a very driven, goal-oriented person, always have been. And I was a competitive athlete when I was young. So I knew how to set goals and go after them and what have you. And what I've learned as I've gotten older and in my career is that's all great. That's all fine and dandy. You can achieve a lot like that. But actually, the skill set that you need to be really highly effective as a leader is to be able to stand back and support and build trust. And it's a lot of, soft skills that are required to make it work. So I think checking in with yourself that you're ready for that in your career is really critical. Because I think being a micromanager or trying to, micromanage a lot is going to be, is a tough road to go down with people. I mean, yes, with juniors, okay, you're going to be more involved, but really at the end of the day, it's about holding them up and helping them develop. And guess what? They're going to fall down a few times. Like, they're going to make mistakes, and you have to be able to kind of get in there and sort of, in a hopefully supportive way, help them grow. And so that's the first piece of advice I would give. The second piece is, thinking about just the individual and the group. So everyone is different. Every individual on your team or who you are managing, if you're in charge of a group, is going to be different. And learning about each individual and taking some time to do that, it has served me very well. Like, there's a lot of psychological surveys, Myers-Briggs and Jungian surveys and things like that out there nowadays that I actually have my new hires take, or I used to do that so that I could understand their communication style. And then you can actually adapt your own communication style so that you're reaching that individual more often than just, in my mind, making them adjust to just your communication style. I think it's a two-way street. For people to really buy into you as a leader and manager, you want them to hear you. And they might have a very different communication style than you have. And I experienced that. I had people with all different types of communication styles. And like you had mentioned, sometimes you're just meeting with people for 10 minutes in your one-to-ones because that's all it takes. That's all they need. And maybe that's all you need too with them. But other people, like I've had to have 1.5-hour meetings, check-ins with them because, they want to go through each of their projects and talk about them, and they need your time and they need your ear for that. So the second piece of advice I would say is put some time and energy into learning about the individuals on your team and building the trust and your communication with them. And then the third piece would be, really thinking about the team dynamic and how to build that camaraderie on your team. And you have to kind of think strategically about the personalities. I mean, once you get to know individuals, you're going to get to know kind of what motivates them, what makes them feel good, and you can lean into that and utilize them within the team setting so that there's a lot of wins. I'm all about small wins and big wins and celebrating them within the team structure. So I used to have this thing called Hero of the Week, where I would kind of identify a group or an individual who really performed really, really well for us. And it wasn't always on a week basis. Sometimes it would be 2 weeks or a month or something like that. But celebrating those individuals within the team, I think went a long way in helping to build that, that feeling of success and camaraderie. So those would be the three things that I would say.
And I'm going to underscore celebrate. I always say celebrate the big wins, celebrate the small wins, celebrate everything, because
Yes,
as you go up, people will discover this as you go up. Their negative emails and feedback you get outweighs the positive by like 100 to 1, right? So my favorite email to see in my inbox is so-and-so really did a great job. And, or we locked this database, or we delivered these tables, and, our client meeting went really well when we were expecting it to be, a little bit more challenging. And being able to turn around and say, great job, look what this team did, way to go. It's good for them, and it's good for you, and it helps people see we're not just getting called out when we make mistakes, right? This is my number one shortcoming, is that I see a lot of negative, and so I will let all the good things that I'm noticing just wash right over me, unfortunately, and then just hunker down onto everything that's going bad. So it's really taken a lot of work to see the positive and note the positive and recognize the positive, and don't let the drudgery of the day keep you from doing that.
My goal was always to build a very high functioning team. That was my goal for me professionally, because I felt like that would serve the organization or the company really well. And it did. It did. So, I say that with confidence, but I do truly believe that, because it was just amazing what my teams were able to perform at like the most critical times. So putting a lot of time and effort into that idea of like, what is your goal as a leader? What do you want to do? And then communicating that and being really upfront with people about your style, about what your goal is for yourself, for you and the group, and being, just really upfront about that. I've always been really upfront and honest about what I'm trying to do here. And if they have feedback, please give it to me. I want that feedback, because we're in this together. It's not about each individual. We don't live in a bubble, each of us. We have to work together. And if people have ideas for improvement, absolutely bring them forth, and we'll see what we can do to make things better for everyone. So those would be some of my ideas for consideration.
I love it. We're in this together. And, a good manager and a good leader in that high performing team, it's benefiting the company, which is good for the company. And it's benefiting the team and the individuals on the team. We're all in it together, and we're all trying to do the right thing. So I'm going to leave that as the last message, and just say thank you again, Marla, for coming on and talking about this. It's so clear you're passionate about teams, and I'm thankful that you came to share that with us today.
Well, thank you, Amanda, for having me. It was a real pleasure to talk with you. Thank you.